90. godina London je postao najpropulzivniji centar kulturne produkcije na svijetu. Ovaj status rezultat je otvaranja umjetničke scene, ne samo utjecajima, već i ljudima iz cijelog svijeta, uz spoznaju da uspjeh danas počiva na ideji misli i radi globalno. Postulat novog, umreženog svijeta najprije je iskoristila industrija zabave, potvrđujući britanski primat u glazbi i kazalištu. A zatim 90-ih dolazi do buma filmske industrije, softvera i konačno vizualnih umjetnosti. Uz sve moguće faktore koji su doveli do ovog kulturnog preporoda, ne mogu se zanemariti državne institucije, kao što su Arts Council, British Council i Visiting Arts, koje su uz one mnogobrojne na lokalnoj razini desetljećima stvarale njegove čvrste temelje. Najveća im je zasluga što su bile u stanju uočiti, iskoristiti i definirati civilizacijske pomake koje su do preporoda dovele.
But that the arts have a vital role themselves as part of the creative economy of the country, and their importance is increasing. They're worth more to the economy now than many traditional industries, such as the motor industry, for example. Britain as a country has definitely got a very strong creative tradition. As our manufacturing base is declining, we've got to exploit that. It's one of our unique sort of talents, our unique selling points, if you like, that this country produces artists, writers, painters, musicians, perhaps disproportionately compared to our population. So what's happening is that policy is shifting towards promoting the arts being important in the new economy, both in terms of people's wealth and job creation, but also as part of education and lifelong learning.
Nova kulturna strategija proizlazi iz činjenice da je u kulturnoj proizvodnji zaposleno 1,4 milijuna ljudi, koji godišnje privređuju 60 bilijuna funti, uz otvaranje po 50.000 novih radnih mjesta u svakoj od sljedeće 3 godine. Dogodio se svojevrsni kopernikanski obrat. Duhovna proizvodnja ili kreativna industrija, kako je sada nazivaju, nije više samo subvencionirana djelatnost, već njezina zarada višestruko vraća investicije.
The new Labour government has come up with this new term called creative industries or cultural exports. Basically, it's doing what we've always done, which is exporting British excellence, but then asking us also to try to make an assessment of the return financially to Britain of all this export abroad. You know, if you did log all this through time, you'd be able to calculate the financial return to Britain of this platform, this important platform of the Venice Biennale of Art. So they have seen this spin-off, and they are really exploiting it and really redefining what we do under that new term of creative exports.
Postoje i drugi razlozi koji su omogućili ovaj prosperitet, koje možda mogu osjetiti samo ljudi koji su rođeni izvan Velike Britanije, poput Filipa Lemoara, voditelja Gate teatra.
I mean, the English have one big advantage is that they speak a language that a lot of people in the world understand or speak. They're obviously a link with the United States. When a show is a big success in the West End in London, it has a future in Broadway, and suddenly you are talking about big commercial events that bring money. And also there is a lot of tourists that come to London that can go and see shows in English, even if they don't speak very, very well the language. So they can attract, the fact of the language is important because they can attract people with shows in their own languages. There's one thing that is important in England compared to other countries that I've seen is that there is a trust that is put into the youth. There is encouragement to young people to create their own ways of doing things, whether it's on the internet, on the record, on the theatre. The young people do a lot by themselves, take a lot, have decided that they might as well do what they want to do. And they are quite respected by the older people who are always interested to find new ideas. So England is always interested into new ideas, is always on the look of the next big thing. So they are very curious, very open to younger generation, which I think is one of the more than a cultural policy from the government, is a general attitude of the population, which is giving a chance to young people to be successful.
Novoostvareni prosperitet obilježen je izgradnjom kapitalnih objekata na obalama Temze, koji su gradu za dolazeći milenij dali nove prepoznatljive vizure. Nazvani su milenijskim projektima, a najuspješniji među njima jest Tate Modern, novi nacionalni muzej suvremene umjetnosti, koji dnevno posjeti 4 puta više posjetilaca nego što je predviđeno.
Here we are in Tate Modern. Tate Modern is the national gallery of modern art in Britain. It's been created out of an old power station on the banks of the Thames, right in the heart of London, opposite St. Paul's Cathedral.
Odluka da se bogata kolekcija galerije Tate razdvoji, jer zgrada na Millbanku ni prostorno ni tehnički nije mogla primiti rastuću kolekciju 20. stoljeća, stara je 20 godina. Gotovo istodobno, godine 1981. s radom je prestala termoelektrana Bankside, izgrađena između 1947. i 1963. godine, prema projektu uvaženog arhitekta Sir Gilsa Gilberta Scotta, autora glasovite britanske crvene telefonske govornice. Međunarodni natječaj raspisan za preuređenje dobili su švicarski arhitekti Jacques Herzog i Pierre de Meuron. Adaptacija kojom je poštovan integritet prijašnjeg projekta već se smatra antologijskim ostvarenjem.
It's a magical place. And before we discovered this building and transformed it into an art gallery, it was completely unknown. And yet it is a very beautiful building in its way. Very, very dramatic, huge industrial building with a central chimney which gives it great symmetry. Inside, we've completely gutted it. We've removed everything from the inside and built this art museum.
Nakon raščišćavanja unutrašnjeg postrojenja termoelektrane ostala je geometrijski jednostavna, monumentalna ljuštura od cigle s nosivom čeličnom konstrukcijom. Autori su je nadogradili sa 2 luminozna kata. Sličan motiv rasvjetljenih balkona jedini je ures unutrašnjosti muzeja, a nekadašnjoj hali glavne turbine prepušteno je da djeluje svojim faraonskim dimenzijama od 160 metara dužine i 32 metra visine prostora. Od 5 etaža 3 su namijenjene izložbama, 2 za predstavljanje kolekcija, a 1 za tematske izložbe. Preostale 2 etaže razdijeljene su na knjižnicu, auditorij, predavaonice, garderobe, suvenirnice i ostale sadržaje koje suvremena muzeologija zahtijeva. Kako ova nova znanost upravo u Britaniji ima zdrav pristup praksi, kustosi Tate Moderna potrudili su se da postav kolekcije učine nesvakidašnjim, zanimljivim i edukativnim.
We have devised a completely new scheme of display. Normal displays are chronological. Most museums around the world display their collections in a chronological way. We decided to break with that and create a themed display. And what we have done is to create 4 themed blocks of galleries. So effectively there are 4 exhibitions which make up one big exhibition of the permanent collection. We thought about many possible structures for these themed displays, but in the end we decided to base them on the great traditional subjects of art. Each suite has a title which is of 3 words, and the first word is the traditional subject, so landscape, for example. But the next 2 words are words which show some of the ways in which this subject has been changed through the 20th century.
Why don't you check and see if I got any overtime coming? While you're at it, ask those eggheads what color socks to wear.
Izložbe su krajolik, tvar, okoliš, povijest, sjećanje, društvo, mrtva priroda, objekt, stvarni život, akt, akcija, tijelo. Izvedene su iz 4 umjetnička žanra: krajolik, akt, povijest i mrtva priroda, kako ih je Francuska akademija zasnovala u 17. stoljeću. Cilj je bio pokazati ne samo kako su oni do danas preživjeli, već kako ih je radikalno izmijenila dinamična umjetnička praksa našeg stoljeća. Svaka od izložaba cijelina je za sebe i pokriva cijelo stoljeće od njegovih početaka do danas, a prostorno zauzima po polovicu kata. Jedna cijela etaža predviđena je za tematsku izložbu koja nije u cijelosti zasnovana na kolekciji Tate Moderna. U vrijeme našeg boravka bila je to izložba između kina i stvarnog mjesta. Najspektakularniji segment izložbenog programa svakako su site specific, radovi namijenjeni golemom, praznom, ulaznom prostoru negdašnje turbinske hale. Na izazov prostora i samog čina otvaranja muzeja prva je odgovorila američka umjetnica francuskog podrijetla Louise Bourgeois, jedna od najrespektabilnijih umjetnika današnjice. Njezini radovi, koji se često doimaju kao mističan spoj arheologije i znanstvene fantastike, idealno se uklapaju u arhitekturu Tate Moderna. Na galeriji, koja u visini prvog kata dijeli prostranstvo ulazne hale, postavljena je Maman, gigantska majka pauk, visoka 10 metara. Produkciju Site Specific projekta uprava Tate Moderna riješila je sponzorskim ugovorom na 5 godina, koji omogućuje da se projekti mijenjaju 2 puta godišnje. Prema trenutačnom sponzoru, program je nazvan Unlever serija. Nevjerojatan uspjeh Tate Moderna ima svoj brojčani izraz. U prvih 6 tjedana posjetio ga je čak 1 milijun posjetilaca.
You come here, you experience the building, you walk into this great space here, which is like an indoor street. You can just hang out here, you know. You see the people sitting on the steps, on the ramp, drinking Coke or whatever, and sitting all around outside. So it's a place that people come to for a whole total experience. And the art is the reason for it, of course. It's also very accessible. The displays that we have devised are very open. They don't demand an academic knowledge of art history. They suggest their own stories. And they also have, you know, little texts that can help you to understand what the displays are about. So, but there is also that element of magic. We don't, you know, there's something extra that has just happened.
O samoj postavi postoje oprečna mišljenja, a kao da se predviđaju i financijski problemi.
Yes, Tate Modern is on one level impressive. On the other hand, I would say that the collection there, I think, is incredibly patchy. A lot of what goes in there is by bequest rather than by purchase. And if you like, I would say that the collection is fully stretched to fully fill Tate Modern. The actual purchasing policy and the funds available to purchase to the Tate are in fact comparatively limited. They haven't been affected by the expenditure on Tate Modern because that's come from a separate source, but in many ways the funding to operate institutions on a day-to-day basis and to constantly strengthen collections is far weaker than, if you like, the public, if you like, the veneer of the institutions would encourage you to think.
No, ostali milenijski projekti ne stoje tako dobro. Pješački most koji Tate Modern povezuje sa Cityjem zatvoren je zbog konstrukcijske pogreške već prvog dana nakon puštanja u promet. Do danas greška nije otklonjena. Tek nekoliko stanica Jubilee Lineom dalje nalazi se najrazvikaniji milenijski projekt, milenijska kupola. Godinu dana nakon pompoznog otvaranja ovog britanskog simbola trećeg tisućljeća, njegova budućnost je neizvjesna. Kupola se zatvara 31. prosinca ove godine, a trenutačno su u jeku pregovori koji će odrediti njezinu sljedeću funkciju. Sadašnja koncepcija prostora razonode donijela je nekoliko puta manji posjet od očekivanog i bit će napuštena. Program koji se pokazao neuspješnim, neobičan i zanimljiv spoj elemenata Luna parka i obrazovanja, namijenjen cijelodnevnom obiteljskom posjetu. Kroz različite paviljone nazvane učenje, tijelo, religija, rad, odmor, brzina, Publici su suvremenom tehnologijom na atraktivan način prezentirani politički korektni stavovi današnjice. Multikulturalnost, ravnopravnost religija, rasa i spolova te ekološka svijest. Najmlađe se kroz igru uvodi u stvarnost genetskih manipulacija, virtualne egzistencije i burzovnih spekulacija. Uzrok neuspjeha možda je u dojmu da je ovaj spoj tehnologije, umjetnosti i sociologije odraslima prezentiran djetinjasto, djeci preozbiljno, a k tome je i preskup za obiteljski budžet. Uz to, ovaj utopijski projekt nije mogao izbjeći neskriveno konzumetsko ozračje koje se očituje u sladunjavom mirisu njegovih 30 restorana, iritantnom instruiranom optimizmu osoblja i kičastoj atrakciji središnjeg milenijskog šova koje je potpisao Peter Gabriel. No vratimo se priči o uspjehu. Pravu eksploziju u 90. godinama u Britaniji doživjela je filmska umjetnost. Budući da ona po svojoj definiciji uključuje pojam industrije, društvena korist od ulaganja u umjetnost tu je najočitija.
U Britaniji se proizvodilo 15-ak, ako i toliko, igranih filmova godišnje. Nitko ozbiljno zapravo nije bio zainteresiran za investiranje u proizvodnju filmova. Bankari i financijske institucije koje su pred 15-20 godina investirali u film koji bi dolazili kod nas na akademiju na poludnevna predavanja, manje više su svi imali istu priču. Mi ne investiramo u film jer se zna da britanski film ne zarađuje novce na box officeu i mi to ne možemo opravdati pred našim dioničarima ulaganje u britanski film. To se sve jako promijenilo u zadnjih 2-3 godine. Naravno, uz nešto više novaca sada od lutrije, to je nešto lakše za mlađe, neetablirane filmske radnike pokušati da dobiju šansu da naprave svoj prvi film. Međutim, to još uvijek ne znači da će taj film na kraju završiti u kinima. A u krajnjoj liniji mjerilo nečije uspjeha u filmskoj industriji u Britaniji na kraju krajeva je uvijek ne po tome da li si ti uspio napraviti film, nego da li je taj film zapravo na kraju napravio nekakav biznis na box officeu. Jer ako nije, onda...
No ne samo što su britanski filmovi poput Trainspottinga ili Full Montya odlično zaradili na kino blagajnama širom svijeta, nego su engleski glumci i redatelji preplavili hollywoodsku produkciju.
In addition to that, the arts also are a great creative powerhouse for the economy. What you've got within the sector that is subsidised by government is a fantastic training ground for technicians, producers, writers, the actors and performers themselves.
Ja sam u Englesku došao pred 9 godina i to tako što sam još iz Hrvatske konkurirao za mjesto na Filmskoj akademiji, ovdje koja se zove The National Film and Television School i smatra se glavnom britanskom filmskom akademijom na odsjek produkcije. I onda sam na kraju prve godine dobio nagradnu stipendiju, školarinu od Britanske akademije filmskih i televizijskih umjetnosti, koja je podmirila troškove moje školarine za 2. i 3. godinu i troškove života. I to je bila nagradna stipendija koja se dodjeljivala svake godine jednom Britancu i jednom strancu na svim filmskim akademijama u Britaniji. I ja sam te godine bio sretni stranac.
Lorenz sada radi kao jedan od trojice producenata u maloj, ali agilnoj filmskoj kompaniji smještenoj na Sohovu, dijelu Londona prepunom srodnih produkcijskih kuća. Kako se kompanija širi, tako kupuje i preuređuje susjedne prostore. Izvana se, gledajući fasade, ne primjećuje ogorčena borba za opstanak i prestiž.
Šta god unutra da se radi i preuređuje, izvana fasada mora izgledati kao što je izgledala ranije i vrlo su oštre restrikcije na to šta i kako se smije raditi. A inače i sama je lokacija, tako da najmanja zgrada u Sohovu, bez obzira koliko može biti uska, ako je na 2-3 kata, vrijedit će 25-30 milijuna maraka.
Biti sretni stranac nije toliko rijedak slučaj. Britanska današnjica otvoreno zaziva strane utjecaje, ugrađujući ih i koristeći kao svježu krv u vlastitoj kulturi.
Ja na primjer mogu reći da ja sam prije nego što sam došla na intervju za moju školu, da sam bila upozorena da kao mature student i kao netko koji dolazi iz druge zemlje, da ću biti jako dobro došla. Postoji određena glad za saznanjem što se servira u drugim kuhinjama. Znači jedan interes i čini mi se da postoji jedna duboka svijest gdje leži snaga kreativnosti i da se treba osnažiti u različitosti radije nego u jednakosti i jednoobraznosti.
Around the world you find that some British performers and artists are very much sought after. Their training is regarded as second to none. So what that means is that we have a great marketable commodity, if you like. There are plenty of others and people who are making a living, having learnt what they've learnt through the British theatre, through the English stage, through having worked in the subsidised sector in this country. So I think there's a realisation that there's tremendous amount to be gained from this sort of creativity.
Premda se ovo stajalište samo po sebi dojemlje razumljivim, malo je društava u kojima se shvaća da subvencioniranje kulture, osim zadovoljavanja nejasnih kulturnih potreba, ima sasvim konkretne prednosti. Ipak, u Velikoj Britaniji se pretpostavlja da subvencija može zadovoljiti tek manji dio potreba i da rad na pronalaženju ostataka sredstava jest dobra škola za profesionalni život.
Private theatres and subsidised theatres sort of mingle much more in London. There's a much less clear-cut difference between funded theatres and private theatres, because even the funded theatres have to really struggle and fight and be inventive and find some money, find some sponsors, attract the audience. So they rely on their tickets and they rely on the trust and foundation even when they receive money from the state. So it's quite poor. There's not much money all over in England, but there is a lot of energy and there's a huge amount of theatre going on.
Priču o Londonu započeli smo tezom o suvremenoj potrebi za osvajanje budućnosti koju je inicirao strelovit razvoj tehnologije. On od ljudi zahtjeva kreativan pristup i neprekidno obrazovanje, ili da se poslužimo rječnikom nove tehnologije, svakodnevni update znanja. Mnogo mladih stvaralaca upravo se nadahnjuje ovim novim, izazovnim, stalno promjenjivim medijima. Istodobno su nikle institucije koje prate novu umjetnost. Jedna od njih je Lux Centar, vodeća britanska ustanova za film, video i digitalne umjetnosti. Lux posjeduje najveću europsku kolekciju umjetničkog filma, videa i kvalitetnu tehničku osnovu produkcije i edukacije za sve vidove pokretne slike. Osnovan je 1997. spajanjem London Filmmakers Cupa s London Electronic Artsom, a financira se sredstvima Lutrije i British Film Instituta. U osnovi uspjeha nalazi se činjenica da su ga osnovali umjetnici za umjetnike.
It was driven by a number of different people. I wouldn't say that it was one person's idea. It was a kind of a momentum that came from organizations that believed that were artist-led, that wanted to create an independent center, which was kind of sited somewhere between the visual arts, traditions of visual arts within the gallery circuit, the gallery world, and traditions of cinema and experimental film. And it was it's there really to provide a dialogue between those two spaces and to create a new space, which is a kind of third space connected with new forms of digital practice, new types of spectatorship, new types of authorship. And it's been really driven partly by the notions of collective artistic centres which developed in the 70s and persisted through the 80s, and also through, the individual forms of, driven individuals throughout that period.
Nove tehnologije automatski uključuju potrebu za neprekidnim obrazovanjem i istraživanjem.
We have a training program which is really divided into short course training, and then we have an education and research program which is really looking at developing new ways of looking at emerging media, say looking at streaming of films on the internet, developing technologies for that, and talking to filmmakers commissioning works for the internet as well.
Iako se program sasvim uključuje u kurentnu kulturnu politiku koja preferira spoj umjetnosti i obrazovanja, financiran je na način koji se u Britaniji smatra poticajnim.
2/3 of its revenue we have to make ourselves, either through ticket sales, through facilities hire, through distribution sales. So we're sort of at a juncture between a kind of commercial economical structure and a funded economical structure. So it makes it quite difficult. We have to constantly juggle the financial and the cultural priorities, but it also makes it exciting in that we have to constantly test ourselves against different markets which are real. So we're not in an ivory tower as some kind of cultural enclave commissioning only the most established artists. We're here really to make a link as well between young artists when they're starting out, or in areas where people don't quite understand what's going on. We see our role as kind of a link between different practices, film, visual arts, a link between commercial sector and the funded sector, film and video, very much a kind of space of transition.
Što se podrazumijeva pod tranzicijskim prostorom najbolje predstavlja projekt Technics, čije su kustosica Liza Haskell i Lina Đuvreković.
And the idea is to work with artists and artist collectives, international, who we're bringing over to the UK. And the people that we're working with are people whose work isn't necessarily object-based. So it's a slightly unusual initiative in the sense that we're using gallery spaces without actually having a piece of work to exhibit. So we are really putting the process on exhibition rather than the actual final result. And a lot of the artists we're working with are net artists, so people working with net art, people working on process-based projects, collaborative projects, and the entire initiative is based on collaboration, people working together and creating production spaces in gallery environments.
Globalna suradnja najčešći oblik izvedbe srodnih projekata. Ona pretpostavlja timski rad, a pitanja autorstva i copyrighta pred potpunim je obratom.
Because a lot of net art that is being created and has been going on for a few years now is not necessarily made by one author. It's very much about kind of throwing back and forth and kind of the idea of a collaborative process rather than one person making a piece of art and there being an idea of an artist behind a work of art. It's much more about collectives, about people working together, at times people who are in different countries. I work with a collective called irrational.org, of whom some members are in Mexico, some people are in Spain, and I've never actually met them, but we're working together.
Svijest o društvenim odnosima česta je tema umjetnosti zasnovane na nove tehnologije. Sudionici smatraju da ova nova, globalno umrežena zajednica, čijem razvoju pridonose, još ima šansu ostvariti pošteniji svijet. U praksi, njihov rad često se doimlje subverzivnim.
As a whole, I wouldn't say that, for example, Irrational or, somebody like Artmark or people that we're working with are necessarily subversive. I wouldn't put that stamp on them, but I would say that a lot of the work that comes out of these collaborations is very socially aware and is dealing with issues that might come across as subversive, and the ways in which people are dealing with it might come across as subversive, especially in the work of somebody like Artmark and at times Irrational as well.
Lux Centar prva je ustanova koja se smjestila na trgu Hoxton, jednoj od čvorišnih točaka londonskog East Enda. Trg ubrzano postaje novim umjetničkim središtem Londona. Da je tomu tako dokazuje i to što je slavni galerist J. Jopling upravo na njemu odlučio otvoriti novu inačicu proslavljene galerije White Cube, jednostavno ju nazvavši White Cube na kvadrat. Novi veći prostor nije izgubio oznake po kojima je stari poznat. Bijela izložbena kocka i dalje predstavlja najavangardnije vizualne umjetnike, ali i susjedni Laks bavi se potpuno novim stvarima.
When we first moved here, when we found the location and we planned to move here in '94, this was really dead. This had one big festival called the Fate Worse Than Death, which was an amazing arts festival once a year, and that was it. Artists had started to use some of the warehouses as galleries. It was a sort of burgeoning artist area. And since we've moved here, partly, I like to think because of us, but also because of the whole momentum of East London becoming a very vibrant.
Zato smo upravo na Hoxtonu razgovarali sa troje mladih kreativnih ljudi kojima očito nije važno jesu li umjetnici ili ono što rade umjetnost.
Series of workshops that are about diffusing skills to do with media production towards people who really want them. And some people want them, many people want them for artistic purposes, some people for more like social purposes, and maybe the one thing that's in common is it's not for people who want those skills for commercial purposes. Making an environment which is quite, it has some structure, but it's not always too structured, so that people can really use it as a meeting place, and people can really use the equipment and the skills of the people who are bringing in to somehow develop their own objectives.
Projekti strukturirani s pomoću nove tehnologije omogućuju planetarnu suradnju, ali upravo oni uključeni u njih uviđaju potrebu ljudskog kontakta.
We need to get a lot more of the human element into computing, into technology, because technology has kind of diffused itself in a sense from human kind of inputs. So you end up with situations where people like myself used to sit underneath the staircase and just prod away at the computers and not talk to people, not share in the kind of human gel that we get from events like Technics, you know, which has becoming more prevalent.
Even online collaboration that we do sometimes when we do different social, community, political projects, art, collaboration that happens often when it's only online. You know, you miss the energy, the vibe you get from people, you know, you don't get any smell, you know, you don't get to see them in the eye, you know, you don't get the face expression, and all these things are basically human communication. Human communication is not purely based on words.
Otuđenje od ljudskosti koje nova tehnologija naizgled nameće, pobudila je njezine korisnike da kritički preispituju samo poimanje kulture u današnjem društvenom okružju.
The meaning of culture, especially in London and today in the capitalist society we live in, is twisted to such an extent. You know, what do we mean when we say culture and
Then culture is really an interactive process, isn't it? It's the way in which people communicate their own personal sensibilities to others. And the web doesn't do this very effectively because it again lacks that human, you know, aspect of the interface where I can smell, sniff. On the internet, it becomes kind of this commodity, you know, this global selling point where, okay, let's sell some culture. And then you start questioning, what the hell is this culture that they're talking about? Yeah. Because it certainly isn't my culture. It's my culture, you can't put it online and sell it. You have to interface with me. You know, you have to interact with me as an individual to get that culture, you know, being passed on, or for you to see or feel that cultural vibes, you know, so.
Na kraju sve je isto kao prije. Ljudi se okupljaju zato što se jedni drugima sviđaju, jer dijele iste ideje, ma iz koga dijela svijeta se uključili u projekt poput Technicsa. Strahu od digitalnog sučeljavanja nema mjesta. On je samo medij upoznavanja koji će inicirati pravi fizički susret. Mladim umjetnicima pruža iluziju da su zaobišli birokraciju, ma koliko dalekovidno institucije Velike Britanije financiraju ovakve projekte. Kad govorimo o kulturnom sučeljavanju, Očito su otvorenost kulturnih institucija i stanovnika svemu novom i okrenutom budućnosti uz tradicionalno bogatu kulturnu ponudu učinili od Londona idealno poprište današnjice. Kulturne putopise po Londonu kojima smo željeli predstaviti ne samo trenutačnu umjetničku produkciju, nego jedinstveni kulturni aparat koji je podržava. Zaključujemo izjavom Michaela Maziera, koji s aspekta vizualnih umjetnosti odlično sumira sve ono što je London i Veliku Britaniju napravilo kulturnim središtem milenijske prekretnice.
The thing with art and visual arts in Britain is that it's very linked to music, fashion. It's linked to the whole export industry of Britain, pop music being a big one. And I think art isn't seen as a kind of exclusive practice that's outside of that. It's seen as part of a big cultural industry. And so a lot of the work, is discussed in the press. It's very visible practice. Some of the work has suffered from that, especially with the opening of the new tape. Art and modern art is part of people's daily language, really, and it's not fully subsidized like some countries in Europe where it becomes isolated from the day to day. So it has a connection with industry, with commerce, but also it has a distance. It has a critical distance to that. So the balance is difficult to sustain, but I think it's a healthy balance.